William Invest, 10/05/2024. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit more about not sweating the small stuff. To be honest, a lot of people go out through their life continuing to kind of constantly give in to the small stuff. Anything that they might consider that it's worth giving their energy into. I don't believe in that. I consider this a way of self-destroying. Basically, you are giving in to emotions that you should not, and those emotions actually basically stress out your life even more than it should be. This is why I believe that you should take a step back and consider if you should really give your attention to something and your energy and your focus, or if you should let it go and just simply ignore it, forget about it, and focus on what's important in life, which is family, friends, relationships. Your work life is always important, of course, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you should be devoured by your work life. You should definitely understand that the concept of not sweating the small stuff is a way of life, which basically brings more happiness and stress release. I will give you an example of work-life situation. There was this guy who basically one day went to work, and he had this pet peeve, I would say. He will constantly take out his anger on his employees, which is not a good way of living, first and foremost. But the important part is that he would take out his anger on his employees by constantly bringing out their mistakes, constantly bringing out negatives, and never actually praising them, which is not a good way on handling your employees. If you consider that, if you continue that by continuing to putting down your employees, they will get better, that's not the right way. They will just get frustrated, they will get stressed out, they will get far and far away from that workplace, because nobody wants to go to a workplace where they're constantly being put down. If the workplace you're creating for your employees is less stressful, more friendly, communicative, and brings out more joy from people, from your employees, I'm 100% sure that your employees will be much more productive. This is why I definitely consider that in a workplace you need to have a way to rest your head, a way to release stress, to be not constantly reminded of your mistakes, and from point to point to be helped on achieving better results. If I make a mistake, I prefer that people come to me, tell me that I have made a mistake, what type of mistake have I made, and how I can correct it. And of course, just as a normal human being, I will also question everything. I will question, okay, but what if we could do it this way? Wouldn't it be easier to do it that way? We do have opinions of our own. We are not robots that are just given a couple of tasks that they have to complete. We are human beings, and all of us see each individual problem from a different angle. And if I see it from the front and I consider that there's no way of improving it, but someone sees it from left or right and they see a way of improving it, then that's a better way on having a team built around your corporate environment. So a quick summary of all of that is, don't sweat the small stuff. Try to find a workplace that is more enjoyable. You're not locked in. And of course, we have to think of a way to constantly provide for our family, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to give our soul to a corporate environment where we're constantly reminded that undermined it and constantly put down. That's a way of self-destruction. Have some no phone time at work. If you're like me, the telephone is a mixed bag of goods. On one hand, it's a lifesaver and obviously critical to most people. Without it, work would be impossible. On the other hand, depending on what you do for a living, the telephone can be one of the most distracting and stressful aspects of your work. Sometimes it seems as if we're always on the phone. And if we are on the phone, it's impossible to get any other type of work done. This can create anxiety and resentment towards the people who are calling us. I was once in an office of a manager when the phone rang. Immediately, he bellowed that their phone never stopped ringing. He then proceeded to pick it up and engage in a 15-minute conversation while I waited. When he finally hung up, he looked exhausted and frustrated. He apologized as the phone rang once again. He later confessed that he was having a great deal of trouble completing his tasks because of the volume of calls he was responding to. At some point, I asked him, have you ever considered having a certain period of time when you are simply don't answer the phone? He looked at me with a puzzled look on his face and said, as a matter of fact, no. It turned out that this simple suggestion helped him not only to relax, but to get more work done as well. Like many people, he didn't need hours of uninterpreted time, but he did need some, because he was the one returning many of the calls instead of responding to them. He was able, in many instances, to cut the length of the return call. He would say things like, hi, John, I've only got 2 minutes, but I wanted to get back to you, obviously with a pen on the phone, and are required to use it to varying degrees. If you are a receptionist, for example, or a telephone operator or a salesperson, this strategy is going to have limited, if any, practical relevance for you. However, for many others, it can be a real lifesaver. In my office, for example, if I didn't have any no phone time, I would be on phone close to 100% of the day. The phone never seems to stop ringing. If I didn't have protective policies in place, I'd have very, very little time to write or work on other projects. I suspect the same way be true for many of you. You can set this strategy in place in many different ways. I have certain times of the day when I turn off the ringer and don't take any calls, other than the ones that I have been previously scheduled or for real emergency, which are extremely rare. This gives me some time to focus without distraction on what's most relevant to my work. Many people, of course, are required to answer the phone as a company policy or as a part of their job, and these people must be a little more creative to implement this strategy. Perhaps you can arrive a little early and turn off the phone before you day officially begins. Or do the same thing after work. I know one woman who decided to bring her lunch to work so that she could work at her desk during a time she was allowed to turn off the phone and let the voicemail answer it. She was able to negotiate an early quitting time so that her actual day wasn't longer, but she was then able to have a little more time to concentrate. In certain instances, you might be able to convince your employer to allow you to experiment with this strategy to see if you can get more done and still return all the calls. Some calls that come in can be returned later or after hours when you can answer specific questions by leaving messages on a voicemail. This may take a minute or two instead of engaging in a 10 or 15-minute conversation. If you work at home or if you ever need to get things done at home, this strategy works wonders and is often easier to put into place. You simply make the decision that for a specific period of time you will not answer the phone, thereby giving yourself. Eliminate the rat race mentality. I often hear people conversing about being stuck in the rat race, as if they were discussing the weather in a very casual matter of fact matter. The assumption seems to be there is no escaping it. It's just a fact of life for everyone. One of the problems with this mentality is that the label rat race implies, among other things, assumptions like I am in a hurry to get out of my way. There's never time. There's not enough to go around. It's a dog eat dog world, and so forth. It sets you up to be frightened, impatient, and annoyed by constantly reinforcing and validating a self defeating belief. You will notice that most people who describe themselves as being in the rat race will indeed be hyper and easily bothered. It's important to note, however, that there are other people with the same types of jobs, pressures, responsibilities, and schedules who experience and describe their work in a much more peaceful and interesting way. Yet, they are very bit as effective and productive as their more nervous and agitated counterparts. It's always refreshing for me to meet people who, despite being part of the corporate commuting and or working world, have made the decisions to not buy into this frantic and destructive label. They refuse to box themselves in by the way they describe their experience. Instead, they live in a more accepting way, constantly on the lookout for a positive take on their experience. So much of our daily work life exists in our own mind, dependent upon what aspects we focus on and how we characterize our experience. In other words, when we describe our day, we might feel very justified in saying, "Oh God, it was awful. I was stuck in a horrible traffic with millions of other angry people. I spent my day in boring meetings, always scrambling a few minutes behind. There were arguments and almost constant conflict to deal with. What a bunch of jerks." The identical day might be throughout differently. You might describe it like this: I drove to work and spent much of my day meeting with people. It was challenging, but I did my best to stay as long as possible at one meeting without being late for the next one. The art of my work is bringing together people who, on the surface, don't seem to be able to get along very well. It's a good thing I am there to help. Can you feel the difference? And it's not a matter of one description being realistic and accurate and the other being wishful thinking. The truth is, both are absolutely accurate. It all depends on the well being of the person doing the thinking. The same dynamic applies to whatever you happen to do for a living or how you spend your time. You can always make the argument, "I am stuck in the rat race," or you can find another way to think about it. You can begin to eliminate the rat race mentality and, in the process, become a calmer person and create a more interesting life by deciding to stop discussing it with others. And by recharacterizing your day and your responsibilities in a healthier way. As your mind is focused in a more positive direction and as you're looking for the gifts of your day instead of the hassles, you'll begin to notice aspects of your work life that may have been invisible to you. You'll actually see things differently. Everywhere you look, you will see opportunities for personal and spiritual growth. You'll see more solutions and fewer problems, as well as plenty of ways to enhance and maximize your experience. I hope you will consider eliminating the rat race mentality. Your work will be a lot more rewarding if you do. Don't dramatize the deadlines. Many of us work under the constant demands of tight deadlines. Authors are no exceptions to this rule. But have you ever stopped to think about how much mental and emotional emphasis we put on our deadlines? And have you ever wondered what negativity consequences are attached to such emphasis? If not, I encourage you to give these questions some careful thinking. It's true that deadlines are a fact of life, yet a lot of this type of stress comes not so much from the deadline itself, but from all the thinking about it. Wondering whether or not we will make it, feeling sorry for ourselves, complaining, and perhaps most of all, commiserating with others. Recently, I was in an office waiting for an appointment. The person I was to meet with had been delayed in traffic. I was trying to read, but became fascinated by a conversation between two coworkers in the office. They were complaining among themselves about the unfair tight deadline they were on. Apparently, they had less than 2 hours to complete some type of report. Whatever it was to be turned in by noon that same day. I sat there listening in amazement as the other two of them spent almost an entire hour complaining about how ridiculous it was to be put through this. They had not taken the first step towards the completion of their goal. Finally, about a minute before the person I was to meet finally arrived, one of them said in a fronting tone, "God, we'd better get started. It's due in an hour." I realize that this is an extreme example, once again, and few of us would waste time in as dramatic a matter as this. However, it does illustrate the point that the deadlines itself isn't always the sole factor in the creation of stress. Ultimately, these two people seem to realize that they could get the job done even in 1 hour. So you have to wonder how different their experience could have been had they calmly taken a deep breath and worked together as quickly and efficiently as possible. It's been my experience that complaining about deadlines, even if the complaints are justified, takes an enormous amount of mental energy and, more importantly, to the deadlines, time. The turmoil you go through, commiserating with others or simply within your own head, is rarely worth it. The added obsessive thinking about the deadline creates its own internal anxiety. I know that deadlines can create quite a bit of stress and that sometimes it doesn't seem fair. However, working toward your goal without the interference of negative mental energy makes any job more manageable. See, if you can notice how often you tend to worry, fret, or complain about deadlines, then try to catch yourself in the act of doing so. When you do, gently remind yourself that your energy will be better spent elsewhere. Who knows? Perhaps you can ultimately make peace with deadlines altogether. together. Dare to be happy. Many people don't allow themselves the luxury of being enthusiastic, light-hearted, inspired, relaxed, or happy, especially at work. To me, this is a very unfortunate form of self denial. It seems that a great number of people are frightened at what a happy demeanor would look like to other people, including coworkers, clients, and employers. After all, they assume someone who is relaxed or happy must not be a hard worker. The logic goes something like this: if they looked happy, others might assume they were satisfied with the status quo and therefore lacking the necessary motivation to excel in their work or go to extra mile. They certainly couldn't survive in a competitive environment. I'm often hired to speak to corporations around the country on stress reduction and happier living. On a number of occasions, the person who invited me to speak has asked me, in a nervous tone, whether I would help the employees become so happy that they would lose their edge. I'm not kidding. In reality, it's the other way around. It's nonsense to believe that a relaxed, happy person necessarily lacks motivation. On the contrary, happy people are almost always the ones who love what they do. It's been shown again and again that people who love what they do are highly motivated by their own enthusiasm to continually better themselves and their performance. They're good listeners and have a sharp learning curve. In addition, happy workers are highly creative, charismatic, easy to be around, and good team players. Unhappy people, on the other hand, are often held back by their own misery or stress, which distracts them from success. Rigid, stressed out people are a drag to be around and difficult to work with. They're the ones who lack motivation because they are so consumed with their own problems, lack of time, and stress. Unhappy people often feel victimized by others and their working conditions. It's difficult for them to be solution oriented because everything is seen as someone else's fault. In addition, they're usually poor team players because they're often self centered and preoccupied with their own issues. They're defensive and almost always poor listeners. If they're successful, it's despite their unhappiness, not because of it. In fact, if an unhappy, stressed out person can learn to become happier, he or she will become even more successful. I feel this strategy would be an excellent way to introduce this book because one of my goals is to convince you that it's okay to be happy, kind, patient, more relaxed, and forgiving. It's to your advantage personally and professionally. You won't lose your edge, nor will you be walked on. I can assure you that you won't become apathetic, uncaring, or unmotivated. To the contrary, you will feel more inspired, creative, and driven to make an even greater contribution than you do right now. You will see solutions and opportunities where others see problems. Likewise, rather than being discouraged by setbacks or failures, you will bounce back quickly and resiliently. You will have increased energy, you will be able to work in the eye of the storm, And because you will be so level headed, you will be the one who is looked to when tough decisions needs to be made. You will rise to the top if you dare to be happy. Your life will begin to change immediately. Your life and your work will take on greater significance and will be experienced as an extraordinary adventure. You will be loved by others, and without a doubt, you will be sweating the small stuff far less often at work. Chapter 2, Becoming Less Controlling. When I talk about being controlling, I am referring to unhealthy attempts to manipulate the behavior of others, having the need to control your environment, insisting on having things be just so in order to feel secure, and becoming immobilized, defensive, or anxious when other people don't behave to your specifications the way you think they should be. To be controlling means you are preoccupied with the actions of others and how those actions affect you. To put it in context of this book, people who are controlling sweat the behavior of others when it doesn't match their own expectations. I've made several observations about people who are controlling, two in particular. First, there are too many of them. For whatever reason, there seems to be a nation trend towards controlling behavior. Secondly, the trait of being controlling is highly stressful, both to the controller and to those who are being controlled. If you want a more peaceful life, it's essential you become less controlling. One of the most extreme examples of controlling behavior I've heard of involved, of all things, paperclips. A lawyer at a top flight law firm had a penchant for certain things to be done in certain ways. Not only big picture things, but very minuscule things as well. This fellow liked to use copper colored paper clips instead of the silver ones his firm provided. What could be more important than that? So he had his secretary buy his own private supply for him each week and didn't even reimburse her. If something came to his desk with the wrong kind of clip, he'd fly into rage. He became known in the office as the paper clip king. It probably won't come as big surprise that this guy was almost always behind on his paperwork, and his work for his clients suffered. All the time he spent getting angry over pretty petty things slowed him down. The paper clips were only one aspect of his controlling behavior. He had rules and regulations about everything from how his coffee was served in special china cup and saucer to the order in which he was introduced in meetings. Ultimately, his controlling behavior turned off one too many of his clients and he was let go from the firm. This is a very unusual and extreme example, yet if you examine your own behavior, you may find areas that you're trying to control that are futile or just plain silly. I encourage you to take a look. A person who is controlling carries with him a great deal of stress. Because not only does he or she have to be concerned with his own choices and behavior, but in addition, he insists that others think and behave in certain ways as well. While occasionally we can influence another person, we certainly can't force him to be a certain way. To someone who is controlling, this is highly frustrating. Obviously, in business, there are many times you want to have a meeting of the minds, or you need others to see things as you do. You have to sell yourself and your ideas to those you work with. In certain instances, you must exert your opinions, influence, even power to get something done. There are times you must insist on getting your way or think of a clever and creative ways to get others to think differently. That's all part of business. And that's absolutely not what I'm referring to here. We're not talking about healthy, normal attempts to come to a meeting of the minds or balancing points of view. We are also not talking about not caring about the behavior of others. Of course, you care. Rather, we are discussing the ways that insistence, singular thinking, rigidity, and the need to control translates into pain and stress. What hurts the controlling person is what goes on inside, his feelings and emotions. The key element seems to be a lack of willingness to allow other people to fully be themselves, to give them space to be who they are, and to respect, really respect the fact that people think differently. Deep down, a controlling person doesn't want other people to be themselves, but rather the image of who they want to be. But people aren't an image of who we want them to be. They are who they are. So if you're tied to an imagined image, you're going to feel frustrated and impotent a great deal of the time. A controlling person assumes that he knows what's best, and by golly, he's going to make other people see the folly of their ways. Within the need to control, there's an inherent lack of respect for opinions and ways of others. The only way to become less controlling is to see the advantages of doing so. You have to see that you can still get your way when it's necessary. Yet, you will be less personally invested. In other words, less will be riding on other people's being, thinking, or behaving in a certain way. This will translate into far less stressful way of being in the world. When you can make allowances in your mind for the fact that other people see life differently than you do, you will experience far less internal struggle. In addition, as you become less controlling, you'll be a lot easier to be around. You can probably guess what most people don't like to be controlled. It's a turn off. It creates resentment and adversarial relationship. As you let go of your need to be so controlling, people will be more inclined to help you. They will want to see you succeed. When people feel accepted for who they are, rather than just judged for who you think they should be, they will admire and respect you. Many of us spend an enormous amount of time and energy engaging in work. 8, 10, even 12 hours a day. Isn't it all uncommon? And whether we work for a giant corporation, a smaller company, or on Wall Street, or wherever a self-employed work for the government or in retail, or for that matter in any other industry or business, there's no doubt about it. Work can be and usually is stressful. Each industry and career has its own unique set of problems and sources of stress, and each job carries its specific burdens and occasional nightmares. From time to time, most of us must deal with some combination of a variety of unpleasant issues, unrealistic deadlines and expectations, bureaucracies, difficult and demanding bosses, ridiculous meetings and memos, quotas, backstabbing and criticism, harassment, uncertainty, and rejection. In addition, there are government regulations and high taxes, lack of appreciation, fierce competition, insensitive or selfish coworkers demanding schedules, poor working conditions, long commutes, and downsizing. It seems that virtually no one is exempt from the hassles of having a job and doing business. Indeed, the questions aren't whether or not stress exists in the workplace, or whether or not you will be exposed to it. It most certainly does, and you most certainly will. Rather, the more relevant question is how are you going to deal with it? You can surrender to the fact that work is inherently stressful and there's nothing you can do about it, or you can begin to walk a slightly different path and learn to respond in new, more peaceful ways to the demands of work. It's clear to me that if you're going to find a way to work with less stress, you're going to have to find answer within yourself. There simply isn't any job available or any way to set up your life that doesn't contain its own unique set of challenges. If you've read any of my earlier books, you know that I am an optimist. I believe that practically anyone can make at least incremental improvements in the quality of their lives by making small daily changes in attitude and behavior. Without minimizing any of the difficult issues that are out there, I know in my heart that we're not victims of the status quo. We can change, but change won't come about as a result of our work, dishing out fewer demands or having an easier life. Rather, change must come from within us. The good news is when it does, our work lives, in fact our entire lives, will seem easier and less stressful. This book came about as a result of thousands of letters and phone calls I received after writing it. Don't sweat the small stuff. And it's as all small stuff. Many people were pleased to discover that after reading the book, their lives were becoming less stressful and more enjoyable. Time and time again, I received requests from readers to write a similar type of a book, only this time focused on specific applications and issues in the workplace. Because, to a large extent, I have overcome my own tendency to sweat the small stuff at work, and because I know many others who have done the same. I decided to embark on another Don't Sweat the Small Stuff journey, geared toward work. It's fascinating to examine the way people deal with the most serious work-related issues, such as being fired or overtaken by a large competitor, internal theft or violence, or being forced to relocate to a new city. When you stop to think about it, it's quite impressive, if not amazing. For the most part, people are courageous, innovative, and resilient when forced to deal with these truly challenging problems. But, as in other areas of life, when dealing with the smaller daily stuff, it's quite a different story. In fact, if you take a step back, you may realize that despite the occasional significant problems in the workplace, much of what bugs us on a day-to-day basis is actually the small stuff. Hopefully, for most of us, the truly serious and tragic issues are few and far between. Indeed, it's all those little hassles that tend to drive us crazy. Imagine for a moment how much energy is expended being stressed out, frustrated, and angry over relatively minor things. How about being offended and bothered or feeling criticized? And think about it. The implications of worry, fear, and commissionery, what impacts do those emotions have on our productivity and on our enjoyment of work? It's exhausting just thinking about it. Now imagine what might happen if you could use that same energy or even some of it on being more productive, creative, and solution oriented. While there may be little we can do about the really big stuff, you must admit that there are many instances when we blow little problems out of proportion and turn things into giant emergencies. Often, when we become frustrated or overwhelmed by the accumulation of all the little things, we have to deal with so much so that we begin to lump together the day to day hassles and begin to treat everything as if it were big stuff. Because there's so much small stuff to deal with at work, there is a correlation between the way you handle small stuff and the overall quality of your experience. There's no questions that if you can learn to treat the smaller hassles with more perspective, wisdom, patience, and with a better sense of humor, you will begin to bring out the best in yourself as well as in others. You will spend far less time being bothered, annoyed, and frustrated, and more time being creative and productive. Solutions will seem as plentiful in calmer state of mind as the problems appear in a more bothered state. One of the nice byproducts of learning not to sweat the small stuff so much is that eventually you begin to see more and more of what you have to deal with on a daily basis as small stuff. Whereas before you may have treated practically everything as if it were a really big deal, you may get better at differentiating between the truly significant and that which is far more benign. As you learn to stop sweating the small stuff at work, you still have many of the same problems to deal with. However, you will experience them quite differently rather than reacting to each issue with knee jerk negativity. You will learn to respond with far more grace and ease. Your stress level will lower and you will begin to have a lot more fun. I know that work can be difficult, but also I know we can learn to respond to the difficulty in a more positive way. I wish you the very best of luck in your work life and hope that this book makes it an easier time for you. This is a book called Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. This is an amazing book that we'll continue to read, which basically helps people realize that life is not all about being completely covered and overtaken by the small stuff, but also being able to say no to negativity and stress and anger. Way of you to kind of change your mindset, to bring yourself forward and start to realize that a lot of the small stuff, the small issues that you acquire at work or your personal life can be just really a small stuff. Meaning that they won't matter in a week, a month, a year. So instead of putting energy into being angry or being frustrated with them, you can simply ignore them. You can understand that with this mindset, you will be able to live a more happier, easier, and enjoyable life. You start seeing that more colors actually. Life seems so gray when you're covered in problems, issues, and stress. You constantly worry about something. But at the end of the day, what you should think about is that it's your life and we only get one life. So we get to live that life the way we want to and the way it makes us happy. If we live a life where we constantly worry how to please others, we are not living for ourselves. We're living to please others. And this is not a good state of life or state of mindset, I would say. You're not bound to please anyone. okay? And no one is bound to please you. We are all equal and we all deserve happiness and less stressful life. We're already living in 2024 where life moves in the fast lane. Everything goes by super quickly everywhere. We rush to work, we rush to the store, we rush life, and we tend to forget when to step back and take a look out of the window. Look at the sky. What's the last time that you actually took your eyes off the road or the screen and you actually sat down and look at the sky? Look at the clouds, the birds, the planes. Maybe you can see the moon, the stars. Once you start realizing that taking a step back and actually thinking for yourself about your own happiness and forgetting about the screen, forgetting about the roads, and kind of start to look in the sky, in the green, in the blue, you start to see more enjoyable life. Nature can definitely nurture a lot of stressful situations. So what I can say is that the moment you start to realize that small stuff at work or life shouldn't affect you, I say that you give yourself a little bit more time in the nature. Maybe go have a walk in the forest or in a park, lay down in the grass, feel the grass, look at the sky. You don't need headphones, you don't need music, you don't need any electronics with you. Just look at people passing by and kind of like this kind of can calm your mind. I believe that. I believe that this could definitely bring a more enjoyable life to you.